Today is National Coming Out Day, and I thought that it was probably time to talk to you about something I've been meaning to say for a while now. There's been a lot of hubbub in the news about these kids that are being tormented and bullied, and about their gender identity and their sexual orientation, resulting in young children committing suicide, and this is inconceivably heartbreaking. The issue that I wanted to talk about was this. What do you do when the intangible idea of who we are to ourselves, our identity, our consciousness, who we are inside this skin that we carry around, does not equal the inheritance of our genetic identity? The physiology is easy to name. This actually ties in with a theme that the TheMeFund is talking about, the binary issue. Check it out right there. With genetics, it's usually pretty simple, with some statistical anomalies, of course, here and there. Basically, you're either male or female, according to your physiology. But what happens when consciousness, our identity, and how we feel about ourselves inside is much more complex and doesn't match? The truth of who we know ourselves to be is not always the same as the truth that people perceive us to be. I was trying to think of a good example, but the only one I could think of was those Jerry Springer babes who dress as though they feel themselves beautiful or sexy. Even if it's obvious that a lot of the audience members disagree, they certainly feel about themselves a certain way. It doesn't really seem to be dependent on what the social paradigm is or what the social perception is of beauty. So Jerry Springer is like basically the World Wrestling Federation of the talk show circuit. But you see what happens. If you've seen any of these clips, people go crazy, they go nuts, they call names, sometimes, standing up and shouting, all of these things that we would maybe consider to be really inappropriate behavior in polite social environment. And these women equally vehemently defend themselves. The thing is, it's kind of a crazy circus-like example, but I think it served a good purpose, is that it introduced the idea that trouble can come out of the disparity between how we see ourselves and how the world sees us. But of course, gender identity and sexual orientation are two of the most charged issues in this area. I think the reason it's so charged is that we as a species have something really important to learn here. And it's one of those things that if we could just pull ourselves together and work it out, we would have one of those wonderful leaps forward in consciousness that signifies one of those great steps in the evolution of the human species. The basis of these sometimes heartbreaking and tragic misunderstandings has really little to do with the idea of gender, though, and more with the idea that we can't seem to treat each other like human beings. The limitations that are put in place, or the assumptions in the way we look at the world that are put in place through the accidents of upbringing, or narrow-mindedness and fear, or even some extreme interpretations of religious doctrine, or even psychological disorder, they go unquestioned. And as horrific as it can be for the people who are standing in the target area of the actions that are brought out of these assumptions, the real locus of the misdeed is in the mind of the person doing the assuming, because these assumptions go unquestioned, and that perpetrates more and more tragedy and further ill treatment against our fellow human beings. We are not, for the most part, acting as though we are masters of our own consciousness. My son and I had a great conversation the other morning about death and ghosts. It had arisen out of a bad dream that had really disturbed him. Over the course of the conversation, I was able to incorporate the analogy of Harry Potter. It really seemed that Harry Potter was able to make the right choice in the Buddhist sense, not the righteousness sense, meaning the good and honorable path, even if it meant that it came at great personal sacrifice to him, or even pain or suffering. It still boiled down to choice. What was nice about the Harry Potter analogy is that it touched him. It made sense to him, and it allowed him to move out of the fearful place that was brought on by the dream state and into the present, into that sense of remembering how powerful he can be when he remembers that he has choices. The truth is, no matter how he might feel in the moment, choice is ubiquitous, and it happens in that nanosecond of time between the event and the reaction to that event. Contrary to what most people believe, those are two separate things. The choices that are inevitable are not because of the events outside, but because of the assumptions that we have in place, or the ideas that we carry around with us. So really, the key to treating each other like human beings is choosing better. Each of us can choose to rise above the accidents and incidents of the weird geometry of our upbringing, and remember in that moment that we have the choice to treat someone like a human being, and whether that means being the bully who is saying really thoughtless, inconsiderate, inhuman, or even sometimes committing violent acts against another human being for no better reason that they fit into your assumptions, or whether it means you are that 12 or 13-year-old. Remembering that the inner truth that you carry around with you is the one that matters. I can't possibly speak to the difficulties of anyone who has been in that situation, and I know that they are not the only ones. But look around you for where that truth is reflected in your world, because there are people around who care about the inner truth much more than they care about the accidents of their upbringing and the assumptions that might be in place because of that. There are people in the world who choose better, and if it makes your life easier to be able to try and find them, even if it's online, even if it's in fiction, then please do it, because life is precious. Life is precious. And there's your crying for this episode. There's this week's burp for ya.